As you may know, it's my mission to interview 100 of the fastest growing and most interesting MSPs on the planet. What you may not know is I am distilling all of that knowledge into one battle-tested book. If you'd like early access to that book, make sure to click the link below.
We meet with the steering committee and we talk about priorities, and we decide as a group, these are the 6 projects we're going to execute this quarter. And so it's a conversation, everyone's agreeing on the priorities, and we're also importantly agreeing on what we're not doing. Because if we don't do this, people just start asking for a lot of projects to be done. It's all over the place. There's no prioritization, there's no strategy.
Hey guys, Damian Stevens, host of MSP Mindset. Today, I continue my mission to interview 100 of the fastest growing and most interesting MSPs on the planet. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Amber, CEO of Parasol Alliance. Now, she built her MSP the way she wanted it. She threw out the MSP playbook and decided to say, I'm going to be 100% virtual from day one. Yet she ended up building a company that was voted the best and brightest place to work over 20 times. She ended up being number 4 on the MSP 501 list and was voted the best and brightest CEO to work for in the nation. So if you want to learn the strategy and the tactics that she used to build her amazing company, don't miss out on our conversation today. Well, Amber, I'm so glad to be with you today. I wanted to kind of kick it off with how did you start Parasol Alliance?
So I worked for a senior living community for 9 years, and I started out at the help desk, and I worked my way up. I got promoted 6 times over 9 years, and I worked my way up to senior IT director by the time I left that company. And so I learned senior living really well. I worked all different parts of the business. I came in third shift, and I trained nurses. And at that time, my kids were 1 and 3. And so if anybody has kids that age, you know that they get sick a lot. And that's a very, very common thing at that age. And so I decided I wanted to do something else, but I really wasn't, I had always thought maybe I would start a company, but wasn't sure if I was ready to do that. Maybe I needed to get another job first. And so I started interviewing for IT director jobs. And my primary question I had was about flexibility, given that my kids were sick a lot and I had to take time off and take them to the doctor or make up time or work from home. And so those were the kinds of questions I was asking companies I was interviewing with. And I interviewed for IT director jobs in Chicago. And I had one company say that they'd never interviewed a woman before. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I had other companies say things like, we don't really understand what you mean. Do you want to work from home? Or do you want to work they would say, we don't really understand what you mean. Do you want to work part-time? You don't really want to work. Or they would quote their PTO policy to me like, oh, you get 5 days and then after this amount of time. And so that actually really led me to push me to starting my own company sooner rather than later. And that's what really inspired me to have such an incredible culture that we have at Parasol Alliance. And when I decided I wanted to start a company, I wasn't really quite sure how to do that. So I know you probably have a lot of entrepreneurs on this podcast and they tell their founding story and how did they get into it. And I think a lot of the typical MSP founder is someone who maybe was an engineer or more of that technical person. And then they decided to go out and, sort of do what they did as an engineer or from their technical background, just to a bigger audience. And for me, it was really completely different. So I came from understanding a business. So from understanding senior living and seeing specific problems in senior living and then coming up with a business solution to solve that. Not really necessarily thinking I want to start an MSP, but I want to start a technology partnership company to solve the specific issues that I see and that I know of from having been in this industry. And so our company is actually we're actually owned by 5 of our clients. So the way I was able to get funding and to start the business was I had connections and I talked to people that I knew. There was one person in specific that I was in touch with who was the CEO of a senior living organization in Chicago. And he had the idea to get our clients, our providers, senior living providers to come together, create the initial investment, and then be clients of ours and give us revenue from day one. So we're a little unique in that as well, that we're owned by our clients. So our focus is really on quality of service. and taking care of our employees and taking care of our clients. It's, of course we're owned by not-for-profits. We are a for-profit companies. Of course we want to grow and have a revenue impact. But, one of the things I like to say is I don't really make revenue-driven decisions a lot of the times. I make decisions based on what's best for our clients, what's best for our staff, and our ownership structure allows me to be able to do that.
I was getting hundreds of backup emails per day, and one little oversight cost me everything. Now, I trusted if I got a success email, I could restore. And when I went to restore, it was completely useless. Instead of blaming my vendor, though, I realized it was my process. So I spent the last 2 decades obsessing over making bulletproof backups. That's why I created Servosity. We solve this by eliminating backup uncertainty with rigorous testing done for you daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly. And we don't just alert you and send you more things to do. We proactively fix issues before they become disasters. If you'd like access to my entire process, book a session with one of our expert backup engineers. We'll walk you through all of it, and afterwards, we'll send you the entire process for free. No commitment necessary. Book your session today while a slot is still available. So is that why you named it, why Alliance is part of your name? I mean, that already is atypical.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's very hard to come up with a name for a company.
It is, right? Even harder if you're looking for a domain availability or something else. Yeah. So you started this because what I love about this story is part of the reason you started this, I think, if I hear you, is because you needed to create the environment that worked best for you, right? Flexibility, young kids, the kind of culture you wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started Parasol Alliance, there's 2 parts I think that are unique about us. So one is the type of services that we provide to our clients and how we function as an MSP. It's very atypical. I think we'll talk about that later. But the other part is the culture I wanted to create. And so I wanted to create an environment that I would want to work at. And when I researched what's out there, what can I copy? What are other people doing that's best practice? I didn't really find a lot. So a lot of what we do, I sort of have come up with, and my leadership team has come up with. And we have, at this point, we've been in business 9 years. We've won 27 Best and Brightest Workplace Awards. I was actually just awarded the Best and Brightest Companies to Work for CEO of the Year as well. So
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of, one of those things where one of my friends who knows me was like, I'm sure you're also rolling your eyes a little bit, but it is a testament to our culture. And, I could give you all kinds of strategies and tips on employee engagement and things like that, and how we do that and how we build such an amazing culture. But first of all, we are 100% virtual. We always have been. Today, we have about 80 employees. For on-site desktop support, we do hire staff near the client location. So we do have staff on-site in 9 different states where they're going on-site and providing services. And then all the other positions are remote. We've had unlimited time off from day one. Just the amount of engagement that we do. So we have a very specific engagement program. And I can talk about that a little bit if you want. But one of the things that we do that I just want to highlight about our culture is we do these town hall sessions twice a year. So we're doing actually our fall ones right now. So we do them spring and fall, and it's mandatory. So every employee in the company has to meet with me and head of HR, and we get them on these small Zoom calls, and we ask them 3 questions. So what are we doing well? What can we do better? And any other feedback. And people are very honest with us about how they feel about things and what's going on. And we take all that feedback and we compile it and we present it back to the entire company with the action items and what we're going to do. And the number one thing we've heard consistently in all the years that we've been doing this, that we do well, is teamwork and collaboration. And that people feel like it's a welcoming culture. They can reach out to anyone for help. And given that it's a virtual company and most of us haven't met each other, it's actually pretty rewarding to hear that year over year, especially as we've grown so much.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack you just said there, because I think most of us think remote is fine for, maybe hybrid, but fully remote. And I think there's some perception that works up until a certain size. Or I can't tell you many MSPs that are like, well, that works if you don't have to go on site. But I got to have all my people in the office because somebody has to go on site. So I'm curious how you've managed the ability to provide, desktop support, go to the client site, as well as, growth to much larger than the typical MSP and still kept, remote as your core part of your DNA?
Well, it's actually been a huge advantage for us. So we've always been remote. And then when COVID hit, we were able to pivot very quickly and help our clients deal with COVID and working from home for them because we were already set up to do that. So I was on some of the best and brightest workplace calls, and people were trying to companies that were trying to support clients or support businesses. They were trying to figure out how to do VPN. How do I work from home as a company? And they were really struggling, and we were already ready and set up. So the way it works is we do provide on-site services in 9 states. And so actually to have a centralized office, I think would actually hurt us because we have I would say out of all the clients we support, the majority are in Wisconsin, but even in Wisconsin, they're still geographically dispersed. And we're also in 8 other states. And so I honestly don't even know where I would put a physical office. So having that, fully set up, fully functional as a remote team from day one, and as we've continued to grow to maintain that structure, has actually been an advantage for us because it allows us to look for opportunities where we can have a true partnership with the clients that we work with, which is our number one criteria for doing business with someone. And so it's not necessarily constrained by a geographic area. It's more about what's the opportunity on both sides, and is this a good idea for a partnership? And then we do hire people near the location. So when they're, so our contracts include a set number of days on site per week. And so they're on site at the communities for a few days a week. And then the rest of the days they're working from home. So our support team, which is about 25 to 30 people, they sort of have 2 jobs. So we don't have any true tier 1, just work from home, answer the phone type positions. So they're doing both where they are on site, and when they're not on site, they're working from home, supporting all of our clients with phone calls and tickets.
Interesting. So how has not knowing the MSP industry, not worked at an MSP, not really knowing what an MSP does, how has that been, from your words, an advantage?
The first time I went to an MSP conference, the MSP 501 conference, that was really my first exposure to the world of MSPs.
But by the way, that in itself is pretty funny. The first time I went to any MSP conference was probably when you're getting an award for being one of the top 500. So that should tell us something right there.
So I went to that conference, and that was my first exposure to the world of other MSPs. And I went to sessions, and I was shocked, honestly, and because the content in the sessions was all things like, how do you upsell your clients? How do you tie them into these contracts so that they can never leave? How do you convince them that they need these services that they don't really need? And that's just not at all how we approach our business. And unfortunately, I have run into MSPs in the real world who have these sort of predatory practices. Like I had a client I was working with who had an MSP, and that MSP was using these crazy scare tactics on them. Like, you're going to have catastrophic failure if you don't replace your servers. And the servers weren't even end of life. And we're trying to convince the client, that's actually not true. So I was exposed to that's the way a lot of MSPs do business. And it's very different than the way we do business. So I can talk a little bit about our business model if you like, if that would help.
Yeah, I think the fact that you came from senior living, but also to very, very few focused on a single niche. And I think of all the niches, not too many people raise their hand and go, ooh, senior living. Like that seems like a challenging niche. So yeah, why and how does it influence your business model?
So our business model, the way that our business model came to be is when I was starting the company. And as I mentioned earlier, we're owned by 5 of our clients. So we originally had about 15 different companies that were interested in investing. Only 5 ended up moving forward. And so for about a year, I was having meetings and talking to these companies and trying to figure out, I didn't even know for sure what the company was going to do, what it was going to look like at that point. And I had asked each of those providers, what's your number one technology challenge, whether you're in-house, outsourced, whatever your situation is. Mm-hmm. And the number one answer they all said was strategy. So they all said that we don't have a CIO. Our CFO is in charge of IT, and they don't really know what decisions to make. And we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what to spend money on. We don't understand the priorities. And so that led to our business model of requiring a strategic assessment before we will take on a full service client. And so I would say we're probably the number one expert potentially in the world, because I've been to the UK and talked to some of the been involved with some of what's going on in the industry in the UK. So I'm doing strategic assessments. So we've done over 100 of them at more than 70 different communities. And our strategic assessments are really focused on more than just IT. So our vision statement is transform technology culture in senior living. And to us, what that means is, and this is something I do a lot of in-person presentations and conferences, and I always make this joke that a lot of people, when they think of IT, they think of the guy wearing khakis in the server room who comes to take care of your computer, right? And I always say, no offense to any IT people in the room wearing khakis or anybody listening. And so really what we want to do, and I think this is not just applicable to senior living, I think it's applicable to a lot of industries, outside of things that maybe are like banking or hospitals, a little bit maybe more fast paced, but what we want to do is we want to change the way people think about IT. We want people to think about technology. So we want people to think technology means process automation. It means efficiency in our workflow practices. It means robotics. It means AI. It means business systems optimization. So that's what our strategic assessment looks at. So I go in person and I interview stakeholders across the organization to understand their pain points, challenges, needs, wish list items on technology. And I meet with people at all different levels of the company. And then we do a full analysis of all the actual, IT infrastructure as well. So our assessment includes IT operations, technology culture, technology governance, all the business applications, network systems, security. We do a CIS assessment, all the low voltage. So for us, that means things like nurse call, door access cameras. We look at resident technology, telecom, and then there's an innovation section. And so we gather all this data and we put it together and we give our clients a roadmap. So a roadmap goes out 3 years. And it essentially is a framework in which to build your IT budget. So we take all of the recommendations across all those areas and put them in one place. Now, a community may not think of some of the things we include as IT or in their IT budget. So they may not have a medical records refresh in their IT budget. It might be in the clinical budget, or a nurse call system replacement. Maybe that's in maintenance. But the goal of putting everything in one place is we want everyone in the organization to agree and buy into the technology plan. Because if you do everything in a silo, you're going to end up with 20 different systems that don't talk to each other, which is the case in a lot of places, most of the places I've been. And so we want to change the culture and the way that our clients think about technology from the ground up by starting with this process and putting all the technology requests into one place. And then after that, we create an IT steering committee to manage and execute the strategy as well. So the strategic plan can be a standalone. So we've had a lot of clients do it and say, thank you very much. I have an internal team. I'm going to take it and implement it. But in a lot of cases, we end up doing further work with the client. And that's what leads into our MSP contract. So I know I'm talking a lot. So if you want me to pause.
No, it's really wonderful. There's a lot to unpack there. So you said you create a steering committee. Is that only made up of their team or also parts of your team, or what does that typically look like?
So after we finish the strategic assessment and they're interested in full service, we can do consulting too, but let's say they're interested in full service. Our MSP contract is a flat rate contract, and it consists of 3 things. So the first thing is unlimited remote support, 24 hours a day, a set number of days on site per week, and that can vary by the community. It may not be every week, depending on how big they are as well. And then the third thing is execution of projects on the roadmap, up to a set number of concurrent projects. So they can usually it's 6, sometimes 3, sometimes 8, depending on the size. Every other MSP charges consulting for that. We don't. We build that into our flat rate contract. And I'll get to the steering committee question, because the steering committee is how you manage this. And I am a PMP. I'm a certified project manager. So I think my background in project management is really what helped me lead, bring this, how to execute the strategy through project management. So once a client becomes a client under this flat rate contract, we're taking care of all the day-to-day break fix, operational support. My printer doesn't work. They're calling us. We're going on site. We're taking care of that. But our real differentiator comes through this steering committee and project management, where we're executing the strategy. So we create a steering committee. It's made up of stakeholders at the client side. It's kind of up to them who they want to be on it, but it can be usually, somebody from each of the key departments. And then they get a client service manager. The client service manager is leading the steering committee. We also have our project managers on those. And then as needed, we'll bring in other resources. So we're regionalized. So each region has an assigned client service manager and a client assigned project manager. And there's about 5-6 clients in a region or so. And so the steering committee is, we get the steering committee together quarterly. The agenda is to go over what's going on with the client. We also share any industry news, innovation, partnerships, podcasts, white papers we've done, things like that, so we can continue to educate and inform our clients. And then we bring up the technology budget. So we also, before we even get to that, we take the technology roadmap and create the IT budget from that so that all the projects are resourced. And we put things on there that don't necessarily have a budget impact either, just so we can keep track of them, like doing a file share cleanup or something like that, or printer copy or contract bid. And then we meet with the steering committee and we talk about priorities, and we decide as a group, these are the 6 projects we're going to execute this quarter. And so it's a conversation. Everyone's agreeing on the priorities, and we're also importantly agreeing on what we're not doing, because if we don't do this, people just start asking for a lot of projects to be done. It's all over the place. There's no prioritization. There's no strategy. The other goal of this is to also set prerequisites to make sure that what you're doing is successful. So let's say they want to put in a resident engagement app or a system that relies on Wi-Fi, and they don't have Wi-Fi in the building. Well, let's put in Wi-Fi first to make sure that this is successful. Or let's say they want to go out and put in a new system, and you already have a system that can do that. So we want to centralize the technology and get everybody to buy in an agreement. So then once the projects are agreed upon, they get assigned to a project manager. Project manager does a whole project kickoff, brings in all the right stakeholders. We have done over 700 projects, and we do them on all types. So they can be, traditional IT projects like a phone system replacement, Wi-Fi upgrade, switch refresh, things like that. But we also do a lot of business applications. So if they need to pick a new dining system, we get all the stakeholders together, do a stakeholder analysis, requirements analysis, write an RFP for them, bid it out, take it and score sheet it. So again, going back to this idea that technology is a lot more than just the IT side, and really being that technology partner to help them move technology forward. So we're executing the vision that way.
So why the heck did you decide to include projects, right? I mean, the typical model might be flat rate, and it may be in some cases is remote and on-site a certain amount, but really atypical to say we're just going to include the projects. And I think some would say, hey, you're leaving a ton of money on the table. Where, like you said earlier, that upsell, that sort of thing. What made you realize that was the right fit for you?
A couple of reasons. First of all, it doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't benefit the client. It doesn't benefit us as their technology support vendor to not do the work that needs to get done. So if they're not upgrading their equipment, it's going to break more often. If they're not, managing and doing the things they need to do, it's more work on our end to now solve maybe emergencies and downtime and replacing things last minute. So it doesn't benefit anyone to have this like break fix mindset. So that's one reason. Second reason is I personally feel it's not ethical to recommend something for a client just because I benefit from it. And this goes back to that other MSP I was talking about who's using these scare tactics. And we even saw the quotes they were giving this client, and we'd bought the same server because we also don't resell hardware either. So we don't make money off of that. But they were trying to sell them a server at double the rate we just got for another client. And again, it's clearly only they're the only ones who benefit. The client's not benefiting from this. So we're very much on the side of the client and doing what's like best for them. And I've seen a lot of MSPs and even internal IT departments manage the client's money as if it's unlimited and they can do whatever they want. And we treat our clients' money and budget as if it's ours. And so we, like, for example, you see a lot of MSPs pushing, SharePoint and OneDrive and Office 365. And they'll just tell the client you have to do this, and they don't really give them reasons, or just they'll say it's, you have to. We would never do that. So we would put together an analysis. We'd do pros and cons. We say, this is what it looks like. This is the cost. This is the period of time over 6 years. This is what we think is happening. But it's ultimately the client's decision, because again, we want to be that technology partner. And we want them to know that what is good for them is good for us as well. And then the other reason is that they will not do the projects if you don't include them. So again, that goes back. It doesn't really benefit anyone if their technology is not moving forward. And if everything's consulting, the truth is they're just not going to do a lot of the work. Yeah. So again, it sets us up for really like a true partnership versus just like we're your vendor and we're just going to try to get as much money from you as we can. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, how do you deal with what seems like the delivery of very different things? It seems like helping them manage a printer bid refresh, you could do remotely, pretty light lift, but you got to go on site and literally put in access points if that's one of the included projects for Wi-Fi. And then, if you don't know anything about a dining management system, you're going through, and perhaps working on a whole set of vendors and doing that. So if you're giving them X number of projects that you guys are going to do, it seems like the amount of on-site resources or just the amount of resources will vary pretty considerably. And I admire that you let them choose, but I also wonder how you end up kind of allocating all the resources to align, since they're essentially choosing those 6 projects or whatever that is.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily just they're deciding that in a vacuum. We're having discussions together and we're coming up with that. And some of the projects do take up 2 slots. I would say the majority of our projects are delivered remotely. Only a few require that on-site person to be involved. And so a lot of it is just we have an engineering team and they only work on projects, and we have a separate group of staff, the admins, and they do tickets. So the work is split up on projects versus tickets. And then the on-site projects would be things like a desktop refresh. Like if they need, let's say we're doing a switch refresh and there's 40 switches or something. A lot of times we'll just send an engineer there for a day or 2. And some of that is billable. And they're just getting it all done, or the on-site person will connect, but everything else is done remotely. So the on-site people are pretty limited in their scope. Like they're not necessarily doing projects. And as far as the range of projects, so yeah, we tend to do a lot of the same projects over and over. So we've done, like I said, about 700 of them or more. Documentation is key. So we're supporting about 15,000 end users in more than 40 different communities. And our typical client size is, between 200 to 700 employees. And so, we hired a documentation specialist a few years ago, and getting your documentation and SOPs is just really critical. And so another thing that we do that's helped us be really successful is we built a responsibility matrix. So we do it as part of onboarding for every client. So we take a list of every technology system and we identify who's responsible. Do we set up accounts? Do they set up accounts? Who calls the vendor? And we've got that built. So, we're kind of getting called for everything. And then we can go back to that and say, okay, we don't do HR passwords. This is who you contact. And so it's very clearly defined who does what. But yeah, I definitely say the projects can be a struggle, just because of resources and, trying to, always get things done as efficiently as possible. But I think our clients really see the value in having that included. And at the end of the 3 years, we write a new strategic assessment for the next 3 years. And we've generally completed most of the work that's in the plan.
That makes a ton of sense. I want to go back to earlier. We talked about, your design for the company is remote. My company is remote, but it tends to be atypical. So for the MSPs that are listening and they maybe they're buying into that now, how do you change your thought patterns? What does that mean for culture if I'm thinking I want to embrace remote fully or partially?
So I think the first thing to know is that culture just doesn't happen on its own. You have to be very intentional with building a culture. And I think the mistake a lot of companies make who do hybrid or they're trying to do work from home is they're not intentional about it. And a lot of people maybe think, well, it's just like working from the office, but you're at home. So we're not going to change any policies. We have a lot of policies in place. So let me try to think of the things we do. So first of all, pre-hire, we do predictive index. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's a behavioral assessment. That was a game changer for us to start using that to get the right skill, the right drivers.
Why is that a game changer for you guys?
So we're extremely fast paced. We have a high ticket count. We also have a very high employee retention rate, by the way. Our service desk almost never turns over, which is almost unheard of in this industry. Right. And I can talk about, our Parasol Academy and our development and things like that. But so we use predictive index, and that was a game changer because we would do a technical lab and we would get people with the right technical skills, but they weren't a good fit in other ways. So they couldn't keep up with the pace, or they didn't have the right other skill set, things like that. And so we ended up having to terminate a lot of people. And so with predictive index, you can build a profile and you can see how well they match that profile. And then there's also a cognitive assessment, which assess how quickly someone can learn and assimilate information, which can help us find out how quickly someone can onboard in the role. Because if you can't function in a fast-paced environment, you're going to fail at this company. So we do predictive index and technical labs pre-hire. And then when they start, when they're doing their onboarding through our HR system, they're asked a couple of questions and they don't really know what it's for. But it's for us to send them a welcome gift. So we ask them like, what's your favorite lunch restaurant? And what's your hobbies? Like, are you into gaming or fishing or whatever? And then we send them a gift, like a personalized gift, as well as a gift card, like welcome to the team. We have a daily Zoom call. So the whole company is on a Zoom call every single day. And of course, not everybody can make it. But it's just, and we have a theme every day. So like Monday is Mindful Monday. So it's tell us one fun thing you did over the weekend. 2 or 3 days of the week, we do AI generated questions because people love those. So we just like ask a random output question. We have a Thankful Thursday where you thank a coworker. Win Wednesday, what was your biggest win for the week? And so people get to see each other a lot.
Let me ask you more about that. It sounds great, but it seems like the more people I get on the meeting, the less people that speak. And, I'm sure you don't get anywhere near 100% attendance, but with 80 people, even if a fraction attend, it's a lot of people. How long is that meeting and how do you actually orchestrate it? Because if you got even a dozen or two people that show up, let alone more, that's interesting to kind of figure out how you organize that chaos.
Yeah, so there's a member of the leadership team is responsible for leading the call, and we do call in every single person, and we go around and people just answer the question. It's pretty quick. The call is maybe about 10 minutes.
Wow.
If there's a new person, it's a little longer because everybody introduces themselves. But the people are in the chat, like they're chatting and they're commenting, and it's the chat's pretty funny actually with a lot of good comments while people are talking. So it goes pretty quick, and I think we have to see like how many we typically have. I would say maybe like 30 people or so.
Oh wow!
It varies, yeah. Sometimes more. We do monthly all staff calls as well, where we get like about 60, 70 people on those. We do have a resident support program. So we have a couple of people that may not work full time. They're like more like 30 hours. So potentially they're not on, or people are on site. They generally skip the call because they're working with the client. So going back to sort of that virtual culture. So we also have, I do a CEO welcome meeting. And so I meet with every single new employee, and I think that it's every other week. And so all the new employees get on the call, and I give them information about company performance, company financials, and this is also all posted on our SharePoint site. I talk about our mission, vision, values, founding story, and give them a chance just to interact with me directly and hear directly from me on our purpose and why. And most people, they're like completely shocked. They're like, I've never had the CEO talk to me about the financial performance of the company or share this information with me. So there's that welcoming component there. We also are really big on mentorship. So we have 2 different mentorship programs. So we do a new employee social. So every quarter we bring all the new employees together and we ask them questions like, how was onboarding? How was training? Can we do anything better? And we're constantly improving our onboarding process through that feedback. But the number one thing people like is our new employee mentorship. And so what we realize is when you start a company, you don't always want to ask your manager questions all the time because you might feel like you're stupid or you're asking too many questions. So they're paired with a mentor for the first 45 days. And they meet with that mentor once a week, and it's a peer. And so they sort of help them through, the other things that they maybe want to know about, or that their manager may not have perspective on that. So that's a big part of onboarding. We're also a traction EOS company. I'm not sure if you've had other companies on to talk about that, so I don't have to get into that too much. So everything's very metrics driven. The whole everyone has a number concept. So we have 30, 60 day and then quarterly metrics. So in the first 30 days, there's a set of metrics that they know they're expected to hit. So they log in and they check what those are, and then they work towards those in those 30-day and 60-day check-in.
Can you give me an example of one of those?
Yeah. So the 30-day metrics are pretty easy. There are things like, read our policies and procedures, learn how to use our ticketing system, which we use Autotask. Love-hate relationship. I don't know allowed to say that on this these specific vendors.
Anything's fair game.
So, that's a complicated system to learn though. I think for like service desk positions, there's an expectation, like they're not expected to have a full ticket load or full call load, but we want you to be doing 10 tickets on your own. And I think there's something about feedback as well, like positive feedback. And I think one of our metrics is reaches out for help when needed. Because that's important to us, that people are not just trying to go off and do things on their own. And then it's a chance for the manager to comment on anything they're seeing. The employee can say if there's anything they're not getting that they'd like to have. They also talk about what they like about the job as well in the 30 days. 60 days is just sort of a ramp up from that. And then once you hit the 90 days, you're expected to really be at full speed. And then we do quarterly assessments as well. So there's quarterly check-ins with metrics on each of those as well.
So I know you went through the details, but I want to zoom out and go big picture. What do you attribute to winning so many awards about being the best place to work? And I think it's interesting, right? Not just Chicago or Milwaukee, but I think some of these were like national awards, best place to work. So that's not an easy thing to pull off. So I guess if we zoom out, what do you attribute to being able to achieve not only that, the external validation is wonderful. I think it's an easy thing for me to point to, but the things that you said, like we're not turning over people, even in our service desk, right? So how do you frame that, and what do you attribute that to?
I think I could sit here all day and give you all kinds of tactics, but I think what it all comes down to is listening, engaging, and then accountability. And as long as whatever strategies or tactics you're doing, follow those, people are going to enjoy working for you, or they're going to have that engagement because they know that you're taking the time to listen. So that the town halls that we take time to do, the stay interviews, the CEO welcome call, we're asking them for feedback. There's no judgment. There's no, punishment or anything for speaking up. And then we have the accountability where we then follow up with exactly what we're going to do about each of the items that they brought up. And we follow through on those. And we're honest about if we're doing this or not doing this. And this is where we're at with that. So people see the follow through. The other thing that I think is really important that I think a lot of people are hesitant to do is terminations. I think to build a culture like this, you cannot hesitate to terminate people who don't fit in with this culture and who are not living the values of the company and who are not in sync with the way everyone else is doing their work. And, I would say the majority of our turnover is from us terminating people. And that can be hard because, you don't want to terminate people, right? But I think the biggest mistake I've made in my 9 years of running a company is not terming certain people sooner. Because the impact they can have, the negative impact, both just from a culture and just mindset perspective, but also from things that they've done wrong that weren't standard that you find out later you have to clean up is huge. And I do think the employees who've been with us a long time, everyone knows if someone's not doing what they're supposed to and they're not carrying their weight. I don't like drama. I don't like gossip. I don't like people saying, oh, so-and-so isn't doing this. And they get let go. And I think people do respect that at a certain level because they know that people are going to be held accountable. And that goes back to the accountability piece.
I think we can all, at least I can relate to waiting too long because it's not fun. I want to give somebody a chance, a second chance, sometimes a third, a fourth, a fifth chance. And so over the years, as you figured out that that's key to letting everybody know that, you'll be held accountable, I guess, how long do you think it takes you now if you've made that wrong hire? Because I love that you are using assessments and other things and trying to make sure you have less of that. But I'm curious, have you been able to shorten the time to find out this is the wrong fit?
Yeah, I think so. But I think it also really depends on the position. And the other thing I'll say is anybody listening who's gone through a lot of growth, what you need in certain positions changes as you grow. So we've definitely experienced that when we were a 20-person company, certain people were great in their roles, but as we became a 50-person company, they couldn't transcend to that level and that skill set, and suddenly they're not the right fit anymore. So we've definitely gone through a lot of those growing pains as part of leadership, and that can be really hard because you have people who have longevity and they know your business and they really care about what you're doing, but they just can't perform at the level you need them to anymore. And so sometimes it can be a little bit longer to make those changes. If we're talking about purely just like a project manager or a technical role or something like that where it's not working out, we tend to turn pretty quickly because, again, we've seen the impact where we don't do that and having to go back and, clean up certain things. And that just makes more work for everybody, and it can cause client and employee unhappiness.
As you've hit these different sizes, right? Whether it's 10, 20, 50, others, have you seen somewhat predictable or maybe in hindsight predictable glass ceilings or just other, like as we hit this, we weren't ready for this level of leadership or we weren't level for middle level leadership or whatever those challenges were. Now looking back, do you see some of that as predictable or not?
Yeah, so I think because of our Traction EOS framework, we were very good with preparing and metrics and strategy. But what was interesting is there's things we didn't expect, like you're saying. So last year, 2023, we added about 25 new employees. We had a huge amount of growth, and we've grown about a minimum of 34% year over year, except for COVID, of course. So, we were kind of ready for it. And we actually built a whole spreadsheet about the clients we thought we were going to onboard and which positions we would hire, because we have a formula when we bring in an engineer or business analyst or things like that. And we were meeting every week and we had it all. We were actually executing our plan. But what we didn't anticipate was the amount of time it takes to train all those new people. Yeah, we've got the staff, we're hiring them, we're getting them in, but now we have to train them. And they're not able to just, be at that level. We need them from day one. And we didn't really think about the toll that would take in the amount of time. So that was a little bit of a surprise to us.
So was that more about the size you'd reached, or more about just the pace of growth? You were just adding so many people to your existing team.
I think the pace of growth, and a big thing for us in the last year or two has really just been getting our operations as streamlined and efficient as possible. And again, going back to documentation, that's a huge part of that. Because again, we're not just a typical MSP where we're just doing desktop and server support. We're doing all the business applications, low voltage and things like that. And, we kind of almost do everything. So again, that's where having that documentation specialist came into play, getting our IT group really cleaned up. We built a whole set of SOPs for service desk. We broke it into regions, which was another thing, because it's overwhelming to start and have to learn so many different IT environments up front, because we don't host or anything. So we're managing all of our clients' environment as is. So I think, documentation, automating things as much as possible, and then standardizing. So we have a standards project. So our onboard, we also really stepped up our onboarding. So our onboarding is incredibly detailed. We have about, 80 different items in our onboarding project. But we now have
onboarding?
Client onboarding, yes, correct. So employee onboarding as well, but client onboarding, I think, was a big one. And so we actually have 3 phases of onboarding. So we have initial onboarding, which is about 90 days. There's about 80 different things we do to get them on board and get them set up in our systems and on our forms and things. Then the second phase is a standards project. So we build a set of standards on the network systems, security, and business systems. And we just go through and just checklist against our standards. How are they set up? We remediate against each of them to get them all our clients on the same level. And then the third is security. So we do have an MSSP service. That's not what this is. MSSP is separate. That's, things like additional software for scans and pen testing and MDR and stuff. This is security within the MSP framework, where we're checking security standards on like password requirements, things like, their firewall settings or, remote access. And we're getting all that set up to a certain standard as well. So that way, ideally, our clients are all set up, from that point, and we try to get them to be as similar as possible, which can help when you're managing that many different environments.
Sure. So on that standardization, there's 2 things that seem at tension with each other. One is they get to pick the projects, and we want to do the things that are right for them. The other is
they have to do that one.
Okay, I was going to say, how do you drive standardization? Nobody's going to pick the same thing.
Yeah, well, that's why we tell them the first quarter project, that has to be a project, and it's going to last up to a year to do all those phases. And we've never had anybody have an issue with that.
Okay. Yeah. So practically, does that mean if you're not using your favorite firewall or switch or software stack, that this is ultimately over a year kind of a rip and replace of all of the things they've invested in? Or is there some meeting in the middle? Or
it's as it ages out.
Okay.
We track all end of life and end of support dates. And that's something the client service manager keeps track of. That's in their budget. So we have an entire budgeting process we go through. We check all of that. And then as it ages out, we'll replace it. So we never come in and tell a client you have to replace everything. The only time we've done that is let's just say someone has like a Palo Alto firewall or something like that, where the subscription costs are really, really high. And we do a cost analysis and we're like, well, this is what the subscription would be for 3 years or 5 years or whatever, but you could buy 2 new firewalls for half that price. So let's take it out. And, we present it that way, but we never make a client change something. We never would. It would just be if it's end of life or if they want to for, reasons like that.
That seems entirely reasonable. That you work on it over life so that you don't have this, we're an MSP and we don't like this we like brand B instead of brand A. You must throw out everything you just bought, 6 months ago. But you are tracking end of life, so you will end up standardizing ultimately over the long term.
Yeah, and I know you said like, well, they get to pick whatever projects they want, but a lot of it is they're going off our recommendation because we're looking at end of life dates, and we plan way in advance because of our strategic plan in place. So let's say they need to replace their phone system, like that's not a cheap project, right? So a year in advance, we'll do an analysis, we'll gather the requirements, we'll bid it out, we'll look at all the options, and we'll prepare what they want to do, and then when we'll put it in the budget. And then by the time it's ready to go, we're just ready to just swap it out and move forward.
Mm. Now, bid it out, meaning that you're managing it, but you're bringing somebody else in, or you guys do all the telephony inside as well?
Yeah, we do not. The only installs we do is network equipment.
Okay.
Everything else. So we don't install phone systems. We don't sell any hardware either. So for many years, we didn't resell anything. We didn't sell antivirus. We didn't sell anything. And that was very intentional. Our board did not want us to. They said, we don't like it when vendors do that to us. We don't want their, us to be, to be pushing things on us. And then COVID hit and we had to diversify our revenue a little bit. Like we didn't lose any business in COVID. We didn't grow because obviously, everybody knows nursing homes, which is our clients, were in the news as death pits and people had other priorities. So we thought about how can we diversify our revenue stream. So we did decide to become a channel partner for a select number of things. It's not a lot. For a couple of reasons. One is we wanted to be able to control the margins. Their products we would have recommended anyways. It was, again, for standardization and best practice. And we researched and wrote up, why did we pick this antivirus or this email security? And again, a client doesn't have to do that. So if we take on a client and they were in-house before and they've already got all their subscriptions, we're not going to say you have to switch to ours. Again, it's just as it renews, we'll move them over to our services.
Yeah, that seems very pragmatic. Does this mean that all your contracts include something like a VCIO since you're so involved in the strategy?
Yeah, that would be the client service manager. So yes, our contracts are all inclusive. So on our IT team or our company team, we have business analysts. So we have about 4 or 5 business analysts. They support all the business applications. That includes a clinical nurse. We have project managers. We have network engineers, network admins, sys engineers, sys admins. We have our support team. We have a senior service desk, which is like a little bit elevated from a service desk. And then they have the client service manager team. So they get all those reasons.
I want to back up a second. You said you also have a clinical nurse on staff.
Yeah.
It's completely atypical to have, a nurse, let alone anybody with kind of true outside the IT domain expertise on staff.
Yeah. Well, again, the business applications is the biggest opportunity I see when I do the strategic plan. So I'll go on site, and a lot of times the IT infrastructure is pretty good. Not always, and sometimes it's more than it needs to be. But the infrastructure generally, IT teams know how to keep up with IT infrastructure. But business applications, this is becoming a huge problem. Where, and again, I don't think it's specific to senior living. Where they bought systems, they're not using them. I went to one client where they have a maintenance work order for the maintenance team, and they have a software they probably pay $30,000 a year for. They're having staff submit requests to it, then they print it, and then they handwrite everything that they do, and then someone manually types it back in the system. So, and this is not that atypical. And so our business analyst team and our project management team, these are like our big differentiators because we can come in and help transform their processes and technology this way and be way more efficient.
Speaking, so I want to go back to one thing. You call them something like client service manager or advisor, and you mentioned business advisors, but then asked about having a VCIO. And normally, at least in the MSP world, you're like, well, that's the guy that cost me a fortune, and I bill him out at 3 times the fortune. And so that's usually an add-on or a super expensive part. But then you used, when I think of client service manager, I kind of think of more of like client success. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, that's really somebody to manage the relationship and maybe also even do upsell in a kind of typical environment. So I have a pretty big cognitive disconnect between the VCIO and client service manager in terms of capability to speak at the strategic level and be kind of that C level. So is that just terminology and your team has that, or are they pulling from other places to kind of actually provide this strategy?
The client service manager fulfills that function. However, it's not just them alone. So the strategic plans are mostly done by myself.
Okay.
And we have a solutions engineer and certain people who work on those. So we're building the strategy there. But the client service manager is heavily involved. So, our client service managers are very well versed in the industry as well. So, a lot of what our recommendations are industry specific or what we know of our client environments that makes sense. And they know that really well. So I feel like the strategy can't be disconnected from the business. Like they have to be fully intertwined. And so that's what our client service manager does. So they're the ones who they lead the steering committees. They're working with the clients to figure out which projects. But the client service manager and the project manager meet every single week. So they're meeting every single week internally and they're talking about what's going on in the client. They pull in our engineers. We have engineers assigned to each region. They're pulling them in. It's constant communication across our team about we also have regional meetings every week. So we're talking about these are things we're seeing. This is what we need to address. These are the on deck projects. Does anybody agree, disagree? So I think the client service manager is managing it but they're not doing it in a vacuum. There's a lot of input and resources and collaboration that happens. So I don't really think I need this high paying person who sits over here who just looks at strategy because it's all intertwined together. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about the other thing it seems everybody's talking about is AI. So I love your view of let's sit down and drive business outcomes. So what is your view of how AI and all of the things that are going on fits into the conversations you have with your clients?
So everyone's talking about AI, like you said. Like if you go to a conference, it's just, how many times are you going to hear AI? And a lot of people are doing presentations on it and things like that. And what we noticed is there wasn't a lot of substance in what we were hearing. People were just kind of tossing it around without really explaining what it is, and no one really knows. But a lot of our clients are getting asked by their board members or whoever, what does AI mean for us? So what we decided to do was write a white paper about it. So we interviewed all the major vendors in the industry space. So medical records vendors, robotics companies, I think there's about 25 vendors we talked to, and we asked each of them, what are you doing for AI? What's your point of view? How's it going to change? And we wrote up our findings, and we included things like, meeting AI tools, the Copilot tools in Microsoft. And we basically just wrote it all down on what does it mean and how can our clients use it? And then we published a white paper on that. We also have a podcast called Raising Tech, which is technology innovation and senior living. And we did a live podcast webinar with AI vendors as well. And we talked about it there, which was really cool. It's very informative, actually. And so we have those resources that we can point our clients to for something specific. However, I believe we're about to do our first project on AI because it's so use case specific. And so we have a client who wants to move forward with doing a project where we'll analyze what they're looking to do, what are the processes, and then we're going to look at what solutions will make sense for them in that case.
Are you seeing more opportunities in the kind of the cost savings, like some kind of automation to save costs on something that I'm already spending money on now? Or are you seeing it as a way to somehow innovate and drive new business or revenue or leads or something on the kind of the other side of the business?
I think for our industry and for our clients, the biggest benefit is going to be data. I think there's been a big data gap. I think a lot of things are still on spreadsheets, especially in the finance world. Budgets are on spreadsheets, projections are on spreadsheets. And I think there's been a big lack in business analytics, KPIs, things like that. And there are now a lot of systems out there for that purpose, but I feel like AI can take that to another level. So there's a couple of industry vendors who can, and they're not just senior living specific actually, but they're in the senior living industry, that can build their own AI tools to sit on top of all of our client databases. So their financial systems, medical records, HR, payroll, and then give you generative AI answers based on the data. And I think that our clients are not able to make a lot of data-driven decisions right now because they don't have the information. So I think using AI in that way is definitely going to have the biggest impact, and it's actually not really that expensive. I think a lot of the other things, in our industry, there's a lot of things that are governed by Medicare and the government with staffing ratios and things like that. So you can't necessarily reduce staffing in a clinical side, but it can help, I think, with just that information to make good decisions.
Interesting. I think it's really atypical, but wonderful that not only do you host a podcast for your clients and invited AI folks on there, but you interviewed all the vendors. I mean, it seems very obvious now that you say it, like go interview all the vendors, write up a white paper. You can share that with your team. You can share that with your clients, because it seems like everybody's saying what's really going on, what's really of substance. So if you don't have a clear answer, go do the homework that everybody's got to do anyway. And I think that's a super obvious, but often a path not taken.
Yeah. And that just goes again. So I don't know if you're familiar with the term BHAG, Big Hairy Audacious Goal, business term. So we set a BHAG in 2021 with two goals. One was to hit a certain revenue size, which we're on target to hit next year. And the second was to become the leading national trusted advisor in senior living technology. And so we do a lot of this work in support of that BHAG. So our podcasts, our white papers, I speak at a lot of conferences. I was in 9 different states in May to go present at these small state conferences just to continue education of the industry. Again, tying it back to our vision of transforming culture, it's more than just about getting a client or getting new business. It's also how do we shift the mindset and help move the industry forward, because aging services is a booming industry, right? And a lot of these senior living communities are not prepared for people to come in that are going to want wall-to-wall Wi-Fi, and they're going to want monitoring services, and they're going to want all this technology. And really, it's equally important to us to help prepare the industry for that change.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I wanted to switch gears, Amber, and ask, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned over all your years in business?
I would say it's the one I mentioned earlier with terminations and not doing them soon enough. I'd say the biggest problems I've had in 9 years have come from me holding on to certain employees for too long and then finding out after they were gone things that they did that should not have happened that we had to then clean up. So that I would say that's definitely the biggest thing. And if you have a gut feeling about something and you just don't wait, that's something you should take care of right away, because your people, you have to have the right people.
It's so easy, in my experience, to totally agree. Put all the effort into getting the right people, but then wait too long. When it's like, I've got a gut feeling, or they're saying this isn't great, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, or I'm going to give them a little longer. And obviously, you shouldn't just rush to randomly fire somebody. But I look back and I've always been too slow. I've never been too fast. And so I can very much relate to, it's a tough thing, because especially if it's not easy when they're brand new, but especially if they've been with you for a period of time, and easy to be stuck there. Yeah. On a related note, if there was one thing you could do differently over your career, or go back and change all these years, what would that be?
I think not having the right people is the biggest issue, because you can't do it by yourself. And I am not a micromanager at all. I don't hold on to things. I want to delegate. And I think if you bottleneck things to yourself as the owner, and you try to control things, you're just going to hurt yourself in the long run. That does come with, again, needing to have the right people. And I think, going along with that is having accountability. So if you did have an employee who did something and it caused an issue with the client, you have to tell the client. You have to be honest about it. You have to be upfront. You can give them a credit. But you have to take responsibility for that, because if you don't, and we've gone to clients and say, look, this got screwed up. It was an employee and we have terminated them because of what happened. And I think they actually really appreciate that.
Yeah. Always take that ownership, right? I'm really interested in I've asked every person so far this question, and I'm really curious of what yours is going to be, because it's about what is a myth that you would dispel about running an MSP. And since you run an MSP so differently, I'd love to hear your take on it now that you've met enough MSPs, you've been at some of the conferences. What's your myth about running one? So
I think the myth then is that being upfront and having the client's best interest is not in conflict with your best interest as an MSP. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I mean, I think some MSPs kind of get it in terms of, it's interesting to me. It's like flat rate. If you don't adopt flat rate, you're doing it wrong. And I think that can solve some of the kind of ethical disinterest, because no matter how good you are, somebody on the team could be basically incented by commission or just by trying to do well for the team to sell them another thing, a widget, a server, whatever it is, into the flat rate. But then now it's like, no, flat rate's not the right way to do it, because then they won't get the premium security package and you have to drive higher upsells and revenue per user. And so it's interesting as our industry has gone from flat rate is the thing to flat rate is, now the old thing. And I'm sure we'll probably, go back and forth on those schools of thought.
Well, I think our employees who worked for other MSPs before, where that was the expectation, they are really relieved to not be in that position. They're like, I hated having to tell clients something that they didn't need or having to upsell them.
So let me zoom all the way back out, and with all the things going on with your business, with the industry, just everything, what's something that you're looking forward to, Amber?
I'm really looking forward to seeing how technology does go to the next level, because not even just in senior living, but I think across the board, I'm sure you saw the Tesla robots that were in the news, I think last weekend, and how things are going to change. And so I think a lot of organizations want to jump to that. They want to go from, not having infrastructure to AI and robotics, but you can't just make that jump. So our whole, business models around it's like a pyramid. So how do we look at all these different levels of technology and get you there over time and build a plan around it? And so I think that that's going to be really necessary for us to build those foundations and help clients do that before they can get to that fun stuff. But I think that that's the challenge, and that's some of the fun to do that, is to see that evolution in our clients who we take on who don't have any infrastructure, any Wi-Fi, and we build that, and then suddenly they can get to that AI level. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, hard to embrace AI if you don't have connectivity to the internet in most cases.
You've got everything in spreadsheets, so you can't get your data out.
Yeah, for sure. What's a book you would recommend that another business leader, is there a top book recommendation?
Yeah, absolutely. The number one book is Traction by Gino Wickman, Entrepreneurial Operating System. Being an EOS company has just been huge for us. So definitely number one book. And then I also, another thing we do is stay interviews. So I think that there's a stay interview book I'd recommend reading. And then anything by Patrick. Book? The Stay Interviews. It's called the Stay Interviews. I think Stay Interviews. I'd have to double check the name. Okay. That's been huge for our culture. And then anything by Patrick Lencioni, of course. I met him at a conference. I was like, oh, author crush. But yeah, so, The Truth About Employee Engagement is all about metrics and engagement, and other books by him. But I'm a big reader, so I love books.
Those are great recommendations. Yeah, a lot of good Gino Wickman ones, and Stay Interviews as well. Well, Amber, for everybody that's listening, would love to maybe connect with you, reach out to you. What's the best way to find you or connect with you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Amber Bardon. I also just created some new social media accounts on TikTok and Instagram under my name, Amber Bardon. So you can find me there. So I'm looking forward to starting to create some content around all the things that we talked about today in little short video clips. Okay, great. And also maybe check out the podcast that you guys run as well. Yeah, Raising Tech is the podcast. You can find it on any podcast platform. Okay, awesome. Well, Amber, this has been such a joy and a gift. Thank you for being on MSP Mindset. Thank you so much for having me.